Not long after Tiberius restored the Temple of Concord, the city's populist factions launched a campaign to remove him as the protector of Julia's sons. Sycophantic letters were written to Caesar Augustus insisting Julia be allowed to divorce Tiberius and marry a man deserving of the consummate name of Caesar. After all, these letters argued, apart from Tiberius and his late brother Drusus, whose consulships were but magnanimous gifts from Augustus himself, no Claudius Nero had been found worthy to hold the fasces in over 200 years. But far from being swayed by the opinion of the people, Tiberius's stepfather instead doubled down. For the 6th BC year, Caesar Augustus impelled the Senate to grant Tiberius the tribuniciar potestas for a lustrum, a period of 5 years. The tribunician powers were those previously held by Marcus Vipsanius Agrippa, naming Tiberius an equal partner with Augustus in the governing of the empire. But those who wished to see Tiberius removed from power could also double down. And they did. During the elections for the 6 BC consulships, this contingent elected a 14-year-old boy to the highest office in the land, though he still wore a child's bulla pendant around his neck for protection from evil spirits, and had not yet donned his adult toga. The primary heir of Augustus was elected senior consul, the heir he had forcibly adopted from his daughter Julia and the deceased but cherished Marcus Agrippa, whom Augustus now sought to exchange for Tiberius in the public's affections. Yet the public failed to cooperate, giving Augustus only flattery by choosing his inexperienced grandson over a Claudian man with military, political, and diplomatic experience. But Caesar Augustus was not flattered. The father of the nation was now displeased, dismayed, and strangely uneasy. He not only chastised and rebuked the Roman people for what they had done, he criticized the actions of his grandsons as well. From the rostra, Caesar Augustus prayed, "Never again should such circumstances arise, as happened to me, that a consul should be elected before the age of 20. Like willful children, the Roman people insisted that Caesar Augustus let the election stand. "One should not be consul," replied Augustus, eyes turning towards his petulant grandsons, "until one can avoid error himself, and resist the impulses of the populace." Resist the impulses of the populace. Augustus had spoken volumes. It was in the impulses of the populace, and not in the mind of a 14-year-old, where the idea of running for the consulship had originated. And, in case any adult Roman mind needed confirmation, that Gaius had even attended the elections had satisfied a necessary prerequisite for winning. But to the 11-year-old brother of Gaius, it must have seemed that challenging authority had been given the green light, as Lucius had been caught entering a theatre without an adult escort, an indication the young boy was sneaking out of the home. It might have surprised both Gaius and Lucius, but even the authority of Caesar Augustus had boundaries. Although he could recommend which candidates should stand for elections, he did not have the power to outright refuse the will of the people. And so, in response to the election of the 14-year-old Gaius Caesar in 6 BC, the stepfather of Tiberius struck a compromise. Caesar Augustus allowed the election to stand, but officially postponed Gaius taking active possession of the office until he reached the age of 20, at which time he could fulfill his elected role as consul of Rome. In the year 2 BC, an up-and-coming 17-year-old named Gaius Caesar set out on a journey to Rome's eastern provinces. The heir apparent of Caesar Augustus bade farewell to his grandfather and 4 siblings. Augustus had paved the way for Gaius to succeed in his first diplomatic mission. His inexperienced grandson went equipped with the experience of the learned men and skilled generals he'd appointed to accompany Gaius to Armenia, a kingdom of critical importance to Rome's domination of the East. It's no surprise then that some senators were nervously hoping Augustus would abandon the notion of sending a youth to resolve the situation. But how was Gaius able to face such a daunting task with so much confidence? Hidden among those seasoned advisors was a sycophant and flatterer, with a long and distinguished career, and an agenda of his own. His name was Marcus Lollius. He'd entered public life as a young legate for Marcus Junius Brutus, and fought on the side of the Republic at Philippi. He'd escaped proscription under the Second Triumvirate by means of a scheme whereby he sold himself into slavery, after arranging to be purchased by a trustworthy friend. That friend was Quintus Aemilius Lepidus, who later appealed to Marcus Agrippa on Lollius's behalf. Not only was his name removed from the proscription lists, but his fate changed with his loyalties, as Lollius fought with the victors, Caesar Divi Filius and Marcus Agrippa, at the Battle of Actium. And his talent for diplomacy did not go unnoticed with the passing of time. In 25 BC, Marcus Lollius was given a signal honor. Caesar Augustus appointed him to serve as the very first governor of the new Roman province of Galatia, where he would seek to ingratiate himself and Rome with the Galatian peoples. He succeeded in training the army of the former King Amyntas, incorporating them into the Roman Legio XXII, Dioteriona. But he also founded a Roman settlement in Galatia, the ancient equivalent of a billboard advertising the wonders of the advanced civilization that accompanied Roman expansion, and a brilliant way to do it, without causing violence in the province. Then, in 19 BC, 2 years after he'd served a term as a Roman consul, Caesar Augustus had appointed him governor of Macedonia, where Marcus Lollius had marched to battle, defeating tribes of raiding Thracians. Another 2 years and Augustus would appoint him governor of Gaul, where he would oversee those legions guarding the Rhine River. But in 16 BC, Marcus Lollius's star would fall. An alliance of Germanic tribes made up of the Sicambri, Tencteri, and Usipetes had crossed over the Rhine River and into Gaul. There, they laid in wait for the legions of Marcus Lollius before prosecuting a successful ambush. Known as the Clades Lolliana, or Lollian disaster, the loss of Lollius's legions to the Germanic ambush damaged his otherwise stellar military reputation. And though Marcus Lollius remained on friendly terms with Caesar Augustus after the Lollian disaster, he would never again command an army. For Lollius, insult was added to injury when Augustus chose his own stepson, Tiberius, to replace him as governor of Gaul. Tiberius's mere appearance in Gaul frightened the Germans so badly that they had quickly retreated back across the Rhine River. And there were the continuing successes of Tiberius in Gaul, along the Danuvius River, and in the annexation of Noricum. But rubbing salt into his wounded pride would not make Lollius want to kiss the feet of Tiberius. His nemesis, Tiberius, was now in exile, while Lollius held a senior posting alongside Gaius Caesar, not only the grandson and heir of Caesar Augustus, but also a young man who likely shared his mother Julia's disdain for his stepfather, Tiberius. As one of the impressive party of men flanking Gaius Caesar on his journey to the east, Marcus Lollius was well poised to influence the youth. In various ways, the others would eventually owe their growing prominence to their roles in the career of Gaius, including the senator Publius Quirinius, Aelius Sejanus, Lucius Domitius Barbus, and Velius Paterculus, the man who was both historian and eyewitness to these events. When the delegation reached the island of Samos, Gaius had an encounter with his stepfather Tiberius, who had traveled from the island of Rhodes to offer Gaius his official greeting. The journey had given Lollius just the space of time he had needed with Gaius, time enough to guarantee that Tiberius was treated to a cold reception. Given his own animosity toward a stepfather he may have seen as the cause of his mother Julia's downfall, Gaius must have been a pushover in the hands of a bitter Lollius. Once his fellow detractors rubbed elbows, Tiberius received only the faintest of social niceties from his stepson Gaius. By the time Gaius and his advisors got down to the business of planning his political strategy for settling the Armenian question, the centurions who guarded Gaius's person knew enough to intentionally exclude Tiberius from their meetings. Tiberius soon received word of the warm wishes of Marcus Lollius. Whether through his niece Livilla, the wife of Gaius, or from Velius Paterculus, a partisan of the Claudians, Tiberius somehow learned that Marcus Lollius had discreetly offered to bring Gaius Caesar, the head of the exile, should the heir of Augustus so desire it. Tiberius left Samos immediately, not in the least inspired by his covert knowledge, although he may not have known that his stepson rejected the offer. He returned to the island of Rhodes and immediately wrote to Augustus, suggesting that Marcus Lollius be removed as advisor to Gaius. But Marcus Lollius was not removed. As Gaius and his contingent arrived in the east, ambassadors and diplomats alike came from all over Rome's eastern provinces to pay homage, not to Gaius Caesar, but to Marcus Lollius, the distinguished military general who controlled access to the right arm of Caesar Augustus, the young Gaius Caesar. On January 1st of the year 1 AD, while in Syria, the 20-year-old Gaius Caesar formally assumed the office of consul, which had been postponed by his grandfather following his electoral victory at the age of 14. Now holding the imperium associated with his consular office, and the additional proconsular imperium bestowed on him at the request of Caesar Augustus, Gaius Caesar took command of the Syrian legions and prepared for battle. The year before assuming the consulship, Gaius and his entourage had toured the eastern provinces. This eastern tour served many purposes for Gaius. It gave him the opportunity to improve diplomatic relations with the Roman East, but also to explore the area to gather military information, whereby he might increase his military dignitas. Making it as far as the Gulf of Aqaba, the Roman prince found what he needed. Not yet endowed with the imperium associated with his upcoming consulship, Gaius could still legally enter the land of Egypt, where his scouts were sent down along the Red Sea to investigate the trail that had been forged some 18 years earlier by Aelius Gallus. Discovering what he required, Gaius returned to Syria, where he assumed his consular office, then marched his forces into the Nabatean lands. Under the advisement of his military personnel, Gaius Caesar waged a quick but successful military campaign against Arabian raiders who were invading the lands of the Nabateans. With a clear victory under his belt, Gaius, who now held imperium, made his way back to the sea, carefully skirting the border of Egypt so as not to break the law by entering. Committing his legions to the march back, Gaius and his retinue then boarded a ship and sailed northward, towards Antioch. As his ships passed by Judea, Gaius considered making a stop, thinking he might enter into Herod's temple in Jerusalem, where the people might witness him offering prayers. But, resting on the counsel of his trusted ministers, Gaius sailed past, a decision for which he was greatly praised by his grandfather, who also understood the potential for danger, were a representative of Rome's new imperial cult religion to step inside Judea's temple, a sacred house of worship for the monotheistic Judeans. Landing in Syria later in 1 AD, Gaius Caesar was now prepared to receive the king of Parthia. Armenia had been invaded by Phraates IV, the ancient enemy of Marcus Antonius and Cleopatra. The old king had successfully taken Armenia, with inside help from Parthian nationalists who had surrounded Armenia's throne, and her king, Tigranes, who had been crowned by Tiberius. King Tigranes was ejected and fled to Rome. Because Armenia was essential to Rome's dominance in the east, it was the hope of King Phraates that his victory could be traded for the return of his 4 eldest sons. As hostages of Caesar Augustus, Phraates, Vonones, Seraspandes, and Rhodospes had been confined to life in Rome. In the year 23 BC, as recognition of Parthia's willingness to return Rome's stolen standards, Caesar Augustus had gifted a beautiful concubine to King Phraates IV. Her name was Theamusa. After giving birth to a son for the Parthian king, Theamusa had ascended the throne as the Queen of Parthia, where she then convinced her husband to send his eldest sons to Rome for education. By the time Gaius Caesar camped his Roman legions along the western bank of the Euphrates River in late 1 AD, King Phraates was dead, poisoned by Theamusa, who now ruled Parthia alongside her 18-year-old son, the new King Phraates, or Little Phraates. With his Parthian forces camped along the Euphrates' eastern bank, Phraates and his mother petitioned that his brothers be returned from Rome. But Caesar Augustus understood that as soon as the 4 men returned to Parthia, they would be put to death in order to secure Phraates the throne. Augustus refused. However, with more of Gaius Caesar's troops still making their way from the Nabateans, and additional military support being sent east by order of Caesar Augustus, Phraates, who suffered political strife within his own court from Parthia's pro-Roman faction, did not want war with Rome. For 2 days, Gaius Caesar and King Phraates negotiated on a small island, which was visible from both banks of the Euphrates. Finally, a settlement was reached. King Phraates conceded Armenia to the control of the Romans, as well as abandoning the request that his elder half-brothers be delivered into his hands. After the agreement was finalized, Gaius Caesar prepared a feast for King Phraates on the west side of the Euphrates, and on the following night, King Phraates prepared a feast for Gaius Caesar on the east bank. During the celebrations, King Phraates blindsided Gaius with a stunning revelation. His chief advisor, Marcus Vipsanius, who controlled access to Gaius Caesar, had been using his position to greatly enrich himself and his family at the expense of the East's wealthy monarchs. Not only had Marcus Vipsanius promised King Phraates that he could bring Gaius Caesar round to fulfilling the Parthian king's desires for a very large sum of gold, but he had also kidnapped royal hostages throughout their year-long tour of the East, holding them for ransom until the royal families paid up. This he did in conjunction with commandeering and sending back to Rome whatever valuable artwork he could get his hands on. After receiving verification of Phraates' accusations from other sources, and on the advice of his grandfather, Caesar Augustus, Gaius Caesar formally renounced the friendship of Marcus Vipsanius, who was immediately removed from his posting by Caesar Augustus. The humiliated Marcus Vipsanius went away and drank poison. In spite of the Vipsanius affair, Gaius Caesar, by the age of 21, could attest to great success with the first military and diplomatic assignment given him by his grandfather, Caesar Augustus. but his celebrations were short-lived. Before the close of the 2 AD year, Gaius Caesar received a dispatch from Rome. His younger brother, the 17-year-old Lucius Caesar, was dead. The heir and grandson of Caesar Augustus, Gaius Caesar, embarked on a diplomatic mission involving political conflict within Armenia. Pro-Parthian nationalists within Armenia had declared their loyalty to Parthia, banishing the Roman client king, Tigranes, from Armenia's throne. Parthia's king Phraataces had been quick to lend support and military aid to these rebels. But a pro-Roman faction within Parthia viewed Phraataces as an illegitimate king, being the only son of the concubine, Theomusa. Parthia's legitimate heirs were his older half-brothers, born to royal wives. His 4 aristocratic brothers were living in Rome under the protection of Caesar Augustus, but only with their official removal could Phraataces hope to sit securely on Parthia's throne. In 1 AD, while Gaius Caesar toured the east, King Phraataces had journeyed straight to Rome, with a case to be made to Caesar Augustus. His objective was to secure the return of his 4 elder brothers, by offering to withdraw his official support of Armenia's nationalists, and to recognize Armenia as a Roman possession. But King Phraataces never had the chance to negotiate his offer. Caesar Augustus, who understood that the 4 legitimate heirs to Parthia's throne would be immediately assassinated were he to release them to the illegitimate king, refused to give Phraataces an audience. Observing how Augustus had spurned the king only emboldened the Roman sympathizers and deepened the division within Parthia. Now the negotiations fell to the young Gaius. King Phraataces had no choice but to return to the east and pursue a peace agreement with Gaius Caesar. He could not afford to wage war against Rome without the support of a unified Parthia. With King Phraataces ready to withdraw his support for Armenia's pro-Parthian nationalists and formally acknowledge Rome's possession of Armenia, Gaius and the king quickly reached a peace agreement. During the celebration that followed, Phraataces stunned Gaius by revealing to him the hidden crimes of Marcus Vipsanius, the man who was chief advisor to Gaius. King Phraataces returned home to Parthia in the autumn of 2 AD, while Gaius Caesar was left to ponder the truth about an advisor he had thoroughly trusted. But the matter of Armenia was far from settled. Under the leadership of a man named Abaddon, Armenia's resistance to Rome continued, even without the support of Parthia's king. The rebels attacked pro-Roman towns, as well as Roman garrisons and auxiliary units. Gaius Caesar was not in the mood to prepare for an invasion of Armenia, having just been notified of the death of his younger brother, Lucius. But without the support of Parthia to strengthen them, Armenia's Parthian nationalists would easily fall under the mighty legions of Gaius Caesar. He must move quickly, giving them no time to muster resistance. And so, in the spring of 3 AD, per instructions from his grandfather Augustus, Gaius began marching his forces into Armenia, intending to formally install a new king, Ariobarzanes, on the throne. Ariobarzanes was the son of the king of Media Atropatene, who had beaten back Marcus Antonius 36 years earlier, when Antonius had attempted to take his city. But the Parthian nationalists cared no more for Ariobarzanes than they had for Rome's choice of King Tigranes. To Armenia's Parthian nationalists, both men were merely puppets of Rome. Joining Gaius Caesar and his wife, Livilla, on their journey into Armenia were Gaius's new chief advisor, Publius Sulpicius Quirinius, the military tribune, Velius Boterculus, the Praetorian, Aelius Sejanus, and King Juba of Mauritania. As Gaius's forces and the would-be king, Ariobarzanes, progressed into Armenian territory, they met only minor opposition from the nationalists, winning several early victories as they pressed forward. Finally, the legions of Gaius Caesar reached the town of Artagira. Because the town was swelling with rebel forces, it was chosen as their command base by Abaddon, their leader. The city was so well fortified that Gaius Caesar was forced to lay siege to Artagira. For many months, Gaius's legions surrounded Artagira, closing the city off from water sources, while simultaneously preventing the hunting, gathering, or smuggling in of nourishment or weapons from allies. Finally, around the 9th of September of the 3 AD year, Gaius Caesar received a message. Abaddon was ready to negotiate. The letter brought enticing promises to Gaius Caesar, knowledge of Armenian treasure hoards, as well as the truth regarding the secret agenda of Parthia's king Phraataces. Upon meeting with his advisors, Gaius concluded that the hungry and thirsty rebels had finally lost heart. Abaddon's promise to reveal to Gaius the locations of Armenian treasure was the rebel leader's way of offering a large bribe to the Romans, hoping to bring the conflict to an end. And, just as King Phraataces had shown good faith by revealing the crimes of Marcus Lollius, now Abaddon hoped to show good faith by revealing the secret plans of King Phraataces. Protected by his personal bodyguard, Gaius Caesar entered into the town of Artagira, where he met with Abaddon and several of the rebel leaders. Abaddon immediately passed an important scroll to Gaius Caesar. As Gaius unfurled the scroll and began to read, he felt the sword pierce his shoulder, a blow dealt by Abaddon himself. Screaming out in pain, Gaius Caesar was immediately encircled by his bodyguards, who fought their way out of the meeting, managing to transport Gaius Caesar from the city and back to the safety of his command tent. There, under the care of the army surgeons, and with the ministrations of his dutiful wife, Livilla, his shoulder wound was cleaned. The surgeons finally announced that, although he would require rest, Gaius Caesar would live. Enraged by the assassination attempt on his life, Gaius continued the siege from his sickbed, turning up the heat until the Romans eventually broke the rebels and took the city of Artagira by force. At a ceremony coordinated by Gaius's advisors, Ariobarzanes II was officially crowned king of Armenia, after which Gaius and his entourage made their way back to Syria. But Gaius's body was not recovering from his shoulder wound as it should. Despite the constant care of his wife and doctors, he grew more frail with each passing week, and his mind began to wander in and out of reality. Although Gaius continued to govern in Syria, he did so mostly through a vast number of proxy administrators, who suddenly popped up around the ailing prince, promising their undying loyalty and urging the heir of Augustus to rest and recuperate, with assurance that the burdens of administration were being concluded on his behalf. 2 years earlier, when Gaius was still touring the East in preparation for his upcoming 2 AD consulship, he had received a special letter from his grandfather, Caesar Augustus, which had been written on the occasion of Augustus's 64th birthday. The letter read, "The 9th day before the calends of October. Greetings, my dear Gaius, my dearest little donkey, whom, so help me, I constantly miss whenever you are away from me. But especially on such days as today, my eyes are eager for my Gaius, and wherever you have been today, I hope you have celebrated my 64th birthday in health and happiness. For, as you see, I have passed the climacteric common to all old men, the 63rd year, and I pray the gods that whatever time is left to me, I may pass with you safe and well, with our country in a flourishing condition, while you are playing the man and preparing to succeed to my position. But now, 2.5 years later, Gaius Caesar was not so sure he wanted the position. How it had all seemed like fun and games in the beginning. At 12 years old, riding around his stepfather's military camp on horseback, having the legions make much of his armor. At 14, running for public office, while simultaneously being handed priesthoods, titles, and status by his doting grandfather, and always with the ever-present love and cheers of the Roman people resounding in his ears. While once proud at the thought of assuming the mantle of successor to his grandfather, he now considered the cost. This was a much larger game, and his family was not winning. His mother now lived as an exile on the island of Pandateria, officially labeled a harlot. His brother, Lucius, was dead. He, himself, had been so easily manipulated by Marcus Lollius, naively believing that his stepfather wanted to kill him, and failing to notice that Lollius was engaging in criminal acts behind his back. But most surprising of all, after being brutally attacked, in spite of the universally accepted safety protocols of Apollo, Gaius Caesar was coming to understand his stepfather Tiberius and his seemingly paranoid nature. Taking out his own parchment and read, Gaius penned a letter to his grandfather. The heir of Augustus begged to be relieved of his duty and wholly exempted from public life. He no longer wanted to command an army. He no longer wanted to succeed his grandfather. Gaius Caesar wished to retire to a quiet and private life. His only desire was to be out of the way. Augustus Caesar presented his grandson's heartfelt request to the Senate, where he formally agreed to exempt his grandson from public life, on the condition that Gaius return to Rome. Augustus knew the dangers. Gaius might not survive in the East without Roman legions at his command. His life had already been threatened, and he would now be without the legal protections afforded him by his proconsular imperium. Once home safely with his family, he could lay down the burdens of office and return to private life. Upon receiving this good news, at the beginning of February of 4 AD, Gaius Caesar formally renounced his command of Rome's Syrian legions, saying his farewells to friends and advisors who had been assigned elsewhere. He and his wife, Livilla, along with a few members of his retinue, boarded a merchant ship and set sail for Rome. However, while aboard the ship, Gaius's condition became much worse, forcing the merchant vessel to make an emergency stop at Limyra, in the kingdom of Lycia. There, Gaius's health deteriorated rapidly, his mind drifting in and out of sanity. Finally, on the 21st day of February in the year 4 AD, Gaius Caesar, the grandson and heir of Caesar Augustus, left this earth, leaving open the succession his grandfather had labored over for 2 decades.